wabarakatuh. Okay, so you asked me to give me a little brief introduction about new thinking and what it is. Now, first of all, we debated long and hard about whether we should have a name. What do we stand for? Well, why do we need another group? And actually, we probably don't need another group. What this is about, and when we came together, was about a group of concerned individuals worried about what's going on in the world today and what's going on in this very country. And that's affecting us directly. Affecting us, our children, our families, the environment and the climate, and even the legislation that's coming about. So I came from it from a governor perspective, right? I'm a governor of a local school. I attend lots of meetings, and then the prevent agenda came along. Well, actually, prior to that, the CTS legislation came along. And leading from the CTS legislation, the prevent agenda and the 4 Ps, and I won't go into the details of it. But what really opened my eyes was attending a prevent training session for schools. And what they wanted, teachers, lawyers, doctors, nurses, to actually report on. What they wanted to report on was us and our Islam in reality. And some of the comments I had heard really disturbed me. When I say comments, these are lay people, and it seemed like all the agenda was, let's focus on Muslims, let's make their Islam as difficult as possible. Most of us have grown up here in this country feeling British to a certain extent, but always Muslim and able to practice our Islam. I grew up in the 90s in a very vibrant, university culture where you debate your ideas. You disagreed, but you debated your ideas. And the worry is that this is becoming a very narrow conversation. And where is this headed to? So I said, we debate long and hard. We do need another group? Probably not really, to be honest with you. But what we do need is the Muslims to start waking up, to see what the agenda is, how it's impacting us, and how we could impact our future, and what we should and shouldn't be doing in response to it. So today is really about just trying to get people together and work in a collective manner. We need to break away from our previous allegiances to whatever group, whatever madhab, whatever Ambruli, you're Sufi, you're this, you're that, you're Debandi, you're Salafi. They don't care. Let me make you clear, they don't care, right? All I ever see is attacks on our thinking, on our very Islam. So what you're looking at is ideas or beliefs that we hold dear, and they are shrinking ever more. So, you've seen the, from left and from right, is it okay to be this, is it okay to be that? What they want is a form of Islam that will work within the current environment. And that means probably no Islam at all, in my personal opinion, but, you can take that for what you like. So today is really just about, getting together, discussing some ideas, listening to a very good speaker, mashallah, and seeing what advice we can glean from it. So I'm going to pass it over back to Brother Mustaqim.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Hisham. So as Brother Hisham said, new thinking has been going for about 2 or 3 years. We've had a couple of big annual conferences with about 400 odd people there. This is the first time we're doing this almost informal, a bit warm dinner for all of ourselves, so we can try and get some ideas flowing between yourselves and understand what the issues are. And we've invited a esteemed speaker to do this, but we'll try and do this more regularly, maybe on a quarterly level every year moving forward. So without further much ado, I'd like to introduce Brother Mustaqim Bleher. I'll just read out his profile very briefly. So Brother Sahib Mustaqim Bleher is originally from Heidelberg in Germany. He is a professor of linguistics, and he has translated several titles of Islamic literature from Arabic to German. Brother Bleher is a Muslim resident in the UK, and he came to the realizations that Muslims had neglected the need for public advocacy of Islamic solutions and lacked the political clout necessary to achieve recognition. So in order to focus on some of the Islamic answers to these solutions, he partook in Islamic work and has lectured up and down the country and in various other places as well on these issues. So inshallah we'll pass it over to Brother Mustaqim Bleher for his talk. We'll do it in 2 parts. We'll continue until Maghrib time for now. We'll break for Salah, and then inshallah we'll continue afterwards, just to make best use of time, inshallah. Okay? So I'll hand over to Brother Bleher.
Thank you very much. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Brother, can you do me a favor? Can we move this table up just a little bit so I can... Yeah, I can move. Today's format is a little bit different than your usual lecture, and that's a good thing. Because normally when you have a talk or a lecture, it's somebody telling you what they think is right, and you listen and you agree or disagree and go away. That's not really what we need to do. We need to throw in some ideas and then keep talking about them. Because it's only when we meet together and talk about ideas that something comes from it. Both better ideas and also action. Because ideas that don't lead to action are pretty useless, really. We got lots of those. Now, these days we are used to hear a lot of negative news about Islam, and we also are used to ourselves as Muslims have quite a negative view of the future, and with it a kind of low self-esteem about what we're likely to achieve. I didn't know anything about this group in Luton, but I think it's a good thing. I want to start with this. It's very good to see a room full of people who want to talk about what Islam means to us today. Unless, of course, there's the food as well. Over straws. Now, what I'm trying to share with you today is what my reflections are after having quite actively been involved in a number of Islamic activities. I've been talking, writing, meeting, and I've seen us go a step forward, 2 steps back, another step forward, 3 steps back, and you know, we've been through those processes and it's just not working. And I ask myself, why do we always start again at a point that we thought we had mastered long ago? You know, for example, we have mosques. We finally train people to do khutbahs in English, and suddenly we end up with mosques where nobody does the khutbah in English anymore, because we've got a new influx of people who like to do khutbahs about things that, well, certainly don't matter to the young people whom we want to attract to come into the mosque. Or we had madrasas where the teaching methods evolved into something that actually inspired young people, and now we have madrasas again that, well, somehow don't inspire anybody. And I'm not generalizing. I mean, there is good and bad examples, but I think you all recognize that we make certain progress, and then suddenly, for some reason that has nothing to do with us, because of demographics, because of government policy, because of all kinds of things. We used to have universities where you could debate any subject. Now you can't talk about anything anymore. The climate has changed, but also these things are forced upon us. Now, we need to really figure out how we define ourselves as Muslims within this society and within the larger global situation. And it's quite a tricky one. Of course, we're all Muslims. Islam is central to our lives, so we think. It's just we misunderstood, otherwise there isn't really a problem. Well, there is, because we are in a world that is what they call post-modernist, in a world where fragmentation is the order of the day, where relativism has been taken to an extreme. There's a bit of too much echo in here. To an extreme where nothing holds true anymore, and if it holds true, it only holds true for yourself. Islam cannot survive with that mindset. I want to say this categorically. Islam cannot survive with a postmodernist mindset. Islam needs a reappraisal and a completely different understanding. Otherwise, we end up with the situation where we have a household where the father prays and the son doesn't. The mother wears hijab and the daughter doesn't. Or the daughter wears hijab and the mother doesn't. And nobody knows why they're doing what. Where you call yourself Abdullah at home and Abs at work. Yeah? Because you've got to fit in. I have recently coined the term, I'm working on trying to define some of these things that I call conceptual Islam. It's just a term, but to me it means we need to think about Islam as a concept, because at the moment Islam is so many things to so many people. For some it's just rules and regulations. But rules and regulations mean nothing when you don't know where they're coming from and where they're leading to. For others it's a cultural expression. But cultures kind of disappear in new environments. We all know that. Now, when you have a building, and the edifice of Islam is no different, you need to have strong foundations. You need to have, there might be architects amongst us, you need to have load-bearing walls. You can't just put walls anywhere. You need to have a structure. And only then can you fill it in and expand on it. And what we're doing with Islam at the moment is we want to hang nice pictures on walls that won't hold them, on foundations that have crumbled. And it may give the semblance for a little while of being something quite interesting, but it will not for long, that sort of touch-up business, hide the fact that the whole thing's been crumbling for a while. We only have two types of intact Islam in our minds. We either dwell in the past, the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, everything was just fine. Or in the future, sometime in the future we will have the perfect Islam. But we live here and now. We cannot keep our eyes just on the past or on the future. We have to deal with our present issues, of which there are many. Some imposed on us, some to do with ourselves. So we need to actually understand what is it that defines us as Muslims. And we've made a big mistake. We thought that Islam is compatible with other systems, when it isn't. Islam is not compatible with other systems. The truth is not divided. It's either true or false. It can't be both. Now, we thought that if in a secular framework that we have been taught falsely is neutral, we compete with other religions and none, we might just come out on top. That is not so, because the framework is not neutral. Secularism is a religion of denial of the divine. It cannot be the umpire, the arbiter of what is right or wrong. It pushes on us a worldview that because our own teaching has withered away, we are at a loss of dealing with. We no longer deal in philosophy. We no longer deal in vision. There was in the 80s this movement of Islamization of science. I don't know, some of you might remember those terms. people, it was Latin America who came along and took all kinds of geography, biology, this and that, and threw a few ayats in that proved that science was right and made it more Islamic. To the contrary, it didn't make it more Islamic. It actually belittled Islam, because Islam, the Quran, which is our guide through life, is the standard. If you start taking the Quran in support of what science says, you belittle the Quran and uplift science as the standard. So you come to evolution, for example. What is evolution? And I'm not going into detail, I'm just throwing these in, because at the moment I just want to give a few pointers of where this manifests itself. What is evolution? Evolution means that everything gets better all the time. It was a justification for the colonial powers to subjugate the lesser nations because they were already at the higher level of evolvement. That's what evolution was. But more than that, it is the denial of the fact that Allah creates things perfect and then they deteriorate. Because that's what really happens. It's the exact opposite. The truth is the exact opposite of what we've been taught. Take the question about our place in the universe. Because it's not just our place here in Luton. Our place in the universe. The place of humanity in the universe. According to Islam, Allah created with both his hands Adam as the perfect creation. And he placed him on the earth as the perfect place central to this existence. And he made everything else subservient to that purpose of where we are as the progeny of Adam, alayhi salam, to be tested in order to return an answer. Nobody thinks about return these days. We've also learned to be materialistic enough to just think of the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and then time's up. And when time's up, when you have a limited amount of fuel or life, you need to really focus. You need to focus because you can't afford going round in circles. You need to follow the sat-nav, that line, quite literally, that straight line. Now, the secular worldview teaches us that the sun is the center of the universe. And I'm not talking about how it's arranged, which one turns around what. That is not important. I'm talking about philosophy here, that science is not value neutral. The sun, the fire, the Lucifer, that is the center. The one who wants people to rebel against Allah, who wants to liberate them from this tyranny, oppression of Allah, that is their center. And the earth, well, just some rock floating about. Many might be out there. Humans, just some animals evolved. Many more might be out there. Nothing special whatsoever. Human dignity no longer derives from the divine. It is defined as they wish to define it. We live in an age where language is extremely powerful. You see, when the Quran tells us stories, they're not stories. That narrative is something for us to understand what happens in the world around us. One of the most important ones is the story of Pharaoh and Musa alayhi salam. We learn that Pharaoh's society rests on three important pillars. You know, 3 legs on a stool is the minimum for being stable. You can't have less than that. So he had Qarun, Haman, Fir'aun. First Qarun, first mentioned in that list in the Quran. The economic system, the finance. We now live in a society dominated by banks who create money out of nothing and lend it to us at a rate we can never pay it back. It's a modern way of slavery. Pharaoh's society was known for slavery. Now they've refined it. You don't need to beat you. They just give you a mortgage. Then comes Haman, the teacher, the priest, the high priest, the magician, the education system, the media. The magicians were who kept people in line because they could make them afraid. We live in a society now where fear dominates the discourse. Because when people are afraid, you can manipulate them much more easily than when they're at ease and comfortable. And I come to that in a moment with a little bit more. So we need to look at that. Now the media their word magic is extremely powerful. Their image magic is extremely powerful. Why is it, for example, that all the Islamic flags in the world have the pentagon on them? The 5-pointed star of the magicians. Not the 8-pointed star that represents the security of the Kaaba. You find that with the fire brigade and the police service. Interesting. But we don't know, we don't understand symbolism anymore. And then you have the politicians and the army and all those people. They come last, the Pharaoh and his army. Now what did Musa do through the guidance of Allah? Of course, first he understood their system because he grew up in it. That's our experience here. We've grown up in this system. We've become, accountants, doctors, lawyers, engineers, who knows what. We know the system. But then he needed to step out of the system to understand it properly. That was the guidance of Allah. And take a look from the outside and see better. And then he needed to go back and challenge the system. And this challenge is interesting. What he could have done, the magicians throw their stuff, and he throws his, and they compete. One snake battles the other, one dragon, one, all this, who knows what. It's not what happened. You cannot compete with falsehood on the same grounds. You cannot use the same parameters. You cannot accept the same rules. It doesn't work. If you compete with them on the same terms, you are one of them, you've lost. And that's the mistake we are making. We're trying to compete on their terms. With them, we'll never win. What he did, his staff swallowed up their falsehood, rendered it void, useless, pointless, gone. And this is where the magicians realized this is not like our stuff. That's different. He just pulled the rug from our feet. That foundation that we stood on, it just crumbled. It means nothing. We need to think on those terms. How easy is it for this system to crumble? Allah talks about the spider's web being the most fragile of homes. I give you that if we had a week without internet and mobile phones, there'd be riots in the streets. Why would there be riots in the streets? Not just because people can't go on Facebook anymore and have no more friends, which of course means, you're quite lonely and start rioting. No, because they won't have any food anymore either. Because our food now here comes from the other end of the world. It needs to be networked. It needs to be 1 week without electricity, and this whole thing, it's gone. Bare survival suddenly. This high technology is on a very feeble footing. This is why these days a hacker can do more damage than a whole army of 1,000 people armed with who knows what. It's very fragile. But it goes down, we go down with it, because we are just as dependent, are we not? There's a lot to be said about being grounded, but you can't be grounded if you have no ground under your feet. We live in cities. You can hardly grow some, denya in a pot, but you can't live on that alone. We have been systematically, since the Industrial Revolution, been alienated from the land. It's another way of making you dependent and easy to be manipulated. The finance system and the industrialization went hand in hand. And how do you change a society? We build houses in stone. And if the government says we need more one single person studio flats, how are you going to fit a large family in where the grandparents still live with you? You can't. You see, these are realities. You can dream of, but no. So Muslim families are breaking up just as the other families we've seen breaking up and thought, well, that never happened to us. Of course it'll happen to us because we are part of that infrastructure that makes it happen. And we didn't even realize. So we have really, really big issues to address. And in order to address these issues, we need to exactly do what Musa alayhi salam did. We've done that growing up in this society. That we've done, we know all about it. We know about Pharaoh, and we know how false he is as well, because we've seen him. Lived in his household. We have to step out and look at the larger picture. We have to rearrange our thoughts. Come back to understanding the whole hierarchy from the divine to the human. The whole system set up, the philosophy, the purpose of life, the start, the beginning, the end. The focus on the hereafter that made those magicians so strong when the pharaohs threatened them to have their hands and feet cut off at alternative ends and be crucified. He said, it doesn't matter. We're going to the next one anyway. Big deal. I'm nearly 60. I mean, I've got 10 years left. Maybe 20. It's not long, is it? But how do you spend them? So, before we run out of time, which we probably very soon do for Maghrib, that's just our warm-up session. We cannot, because we don't have a prophet with us anymore. We don't have divine guidance in that way. So we have access to divine guidance in the Quran and the Sunnah and many other achievements that have been built on it. We've got that whole Islamic culture that we can still draw on. But this challenge that I've outlined briefly is not something you, me, can address on our own. It needs to be done collectively. To do it collectively, like you said in your introduction, we need to put some differences aside. Because whilst we're busy arguing amongst ourselves, we're not going to reach any conclusions. We're not going to be able to act. Because you can only act on consensus. And as a society, and there aren't many young people here to start with, as a society, we're losing them. As a society, in order to be able to act, we need experience. Experience is made up of success and failure. Too much failure? Big problem. People get despondent. Too much success? Big problem. People get arrogant. You need a bit of this and a bit of that. Somebody needs to guide the next generation of Muslims through success and failure in order to enable them to solve their problems. You know, I remember commenting when I was visiting Malaysia some at least 15 years or more ago. It was a society that had lots of young people, predominantly young people. But it was run by the old. And there was a disconnect. It's not unique to that one, but it's just something that struck me as... And the old did not really connect in order to lead the young to anywhere. So the young were running after everything else. Wanting to go to the West, wanting to do this, wanting to do that. They no longer identified with their own country. I see it in many Muslim countries. I've seen it in Morocco lately. Where the young people no longer identify with their own country. They want to be somewhere else. They want to be someone else. They're not happy with who they are and where they are. That is not a good starting point if you want to move forward. As long as we are sort of semi-schizophrenic or multiple personality Muslims, as long as we are constantly trying to put each other down, as long as we are totally confused as to what is important and what isn't, how are we going to make any difference? And this may be the last point before prayer. We've got to stop looking at ourselves as a minority. Yes. Good news to the stranger. Yes, you're always a stranger in the world if your focus is on the hereafter. True. But minority politics is not to do with that. If we simply strangers or a minority because we don't belong in this world, that's fine. But otherwise, a minority always tries to keep separate, tries to keep to itself, tries to look after its own interests. No good. We had this when we did Islamic Party argument with the Muslim Council of Britain at the time, who in their first political manifesto said they wanted free circumcision on the NHS. We said, what a lot of rubbish. You know, what a stupid focus. Because when you want to change for the better, you need to carry everybody with you. If this country wants to change, the majority of it has to change. If the minority gets some privileges or special rights, it means nothing. You'd be better off arguing for free student finance without having to have interest-bearing loans. That benefits everybody. It's much more Islamic. And it affects everybody. Our task as Muslims is to help those who haven't seen the light to benefit from our insight, is it not? Is it not our task to help them improve their life and serve humanity, and through that they may see that Islam is good for them and for us? Or is it to say, well, we want a bigger piece of the cake from them? No, we can make the cake bigger. It's a question of definition. It's a question of how you look at something. And we have in the past missed the point. Muslims have been in Britain for a good 150 years at least. That translates into 5 or 6 generations. Depends how you count, could be more. We have had people, converts to Islam, who translated the Quran for us 70 years ago. And people from the colonies like Yusuf Ali in India, who translated the Quran for us 70 years ago, if not more. Where has it got us to? We have made no progress. At that rate, with that understanding, with scholars like that, why isn't this island, it's only an island, why hasn't it seen the light of Islam? Why are we still alien? Why are we still a minority? Why are we still outcast? Why are we still suspicious? Why do they fear us? There's something wrong. It's our fault. Of course, you always have enemies, but it's our fault. We have not conveyed the message. Because we have thought about our own benefit, not that of others. But is not the first definition of a Muslim that he is a slave or a servant of Allah? So there is a lot of rethinking that needs to be done. A lot. Because we have no future if we don't think more carefully. And maybe after prayer we can talk a little bit more about geopolitics, about the wider agenda in the world, because there's a lot happening there too. I think we need to break here, yes? Jazakumullah khairan. I want to, when we come back, get a little bit of feedback from you. And then, as I said, address some of the global issues. And then maybe we can reach some conclusions. Or maybe not. Maybe we need to go away and think about it and talk more. But I want this to at least be a starting point in reassessing who we are and where we are. Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Mustaqim. So brothers, firstly, apologies in advance because unfortunately we're short of space, so we have to make do and pray Maghrib the best we can. So inshallah, if I can all ask you to be patient with each other and to be as closest to each other as possible. So we'll try and clear some space to try and pray Maghrib. And then please, if we can pray as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and then come back. After the a break for prayers. Inshallah, we'll continue with the presentation, and inshallah after that we want to make it more interactive. So any thoughts you have, any questions you have for Brother Mustaqim, we'll be glad to kind of take them and answer them and just proceed along. Also, we're going to be having tea and desserts as well after Maghrib. Yeah, I'm sure nobody will, but but yeah. So inshallah, let's try and arrange this the space for prayers, and we'll try and do 2 jamaats.
Well, it's going to be more than that because we're going to do it here.
Okay.
So we're going to move the tables. So we'll do what 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever jamaats.
Yeah, as quickly and as efficiently as we can, inshallah. So jazakallah khair for your patience, brothers.